Okay, good morning everyone. Happy Monday, happy week. I don't know what this is, week 11, week 12. It's the second last week. It's Monday, it's a beautiful day here in Vancouver. I'm sure if you look out the window, you'll see it's nice and sunny. I hope everyone had a great weekend. I know I did. Let's see. So Monica's here. Good morning, Monica. Karen's here. Good morning, Karen. Yellow Baha. Duong is here. Good morning, Duong. Mashid is here. Good morning, Mashid. Jenna's here. Good morning, Jenna. Good afternoon, Jimmy. Manish, what's up? Casey, good morning to you. Ivan, good evening. Hello. Tika, good morning to you, or good evening to you, I guess. Good evening to you, Erica. Okay, so as people continue to pop in here, as you'll recall, on Friday we watched a little bit of a documentary called The Ugly Face of Disability Hate Crimes. And so we got about halfway through that, right? We watched 25 minutes and then we watched a further 10. And we had a few questions from that, so we'll review those today. We'll watch the rest of the video today. We'll review the final set of questions from that. Yeah, that's what we'll do today. Yeah, let's jump in there, okay? So yeah, from Friday, we're dealing with a new unit now. We're talking about ableism, right? Where we have discrimination, we have prejudice, or we have societal inequities between people who have disabilities and people who do not, right? Good morning, Banamere. And so we said that people who fall into this category of disabled are actually quite varied, right? And so we have people who have visual impairments or who have hearing impairments. We have people who might have mental health conditions or intellectual or developmental disabilities. We have people who might have an acquired brain injury, so they might have injured their brain somehow during their lives. We have people who are on the autism spectrum, and we have people with physical disabilities. And so, good morning, Sam. All of these people fit into the category of, the social category of being disabled. But of course, if you look at these, not all of these disabilities are easily obvious to people when they see someone, right? So if you see someone in a wheelchair, yes, it's quite obvious that they have a physical disability. But if you have someone who is on the autism spectrum or someone who might have a mental health condition, it might not be easy to determine when you see them that they have this particular disability, right? So some of these disabilities are much more visible in society than others. And so that's going to change people's experience in society, right? It's much easier if you are a member of a minoritized group. It's much easier for you if you can kind of blend in, right? If people don't happen to know that you are that you belong to that group. But of course, for some races, for some genders, for some sexualities, for some religious orientations, and for some disabilities, some people don't blend in quite so easily, right? Not that they should have to, of course. We said that all of these disabilities have various stereotypes associated with them. And those stereotypes support kind of a broader ideology in society that somehow people with disabilities are less. They are not as valuable and don't need an appropriate amount of care. And I think that's particularly true. I think that's particularly true for people with mental disabilities. I can't speak for your home countries, of course, because I'm not from there. But here in the West, we've done a really good job of taking care of people's physical disabilities and physical illnesses. And so, if someone develops cancer, for instance, we have many scientifically advanced treatments. You will get that treatment here in Canada. There's lots of clinics that you can go to. If you tell people that you have cancer, people will be very sympathetic, and they'll call you brave, and they'll say, you're fighting this fight, and they'll support you. They'll emotionally support you. But we don't have a similar attitude about people with mental illnesses. And so for someone who has schizophrenia, for instance, they won't have the kind of support that cancer patients have in the medical system in terms of resources and funding, but they also won't have the same support from society. People tend to stigmatize and look down upon, or sometimes even fear, people with mental illness. And so there's a big difference, at least here in the West, between physical illness and mental illness. And physical illness is usually, or physical disability, is usually met with support and empathy. The same is not often said for mental illnesses. Mental illnesses are often greeted with sort of suspicion and fear, sometimes mocking, a lot of discomfort. And so here in the West, we haven't really done a very good job of addressing mental illness. And so that's going to change these people's experience in society as well, right? So if you are a person in a wheelchair, you may have a more supportive experience in society than someone with a severe mental illness, right? So again, people in this social group of disability are often viewed differently and supported differently. And maybe the one other thing I'll mention at this point is one of the things I think is going on with some forms of mental illness, at least around people's discomfort, is the idea around, remember a number of weeks ago when we were learning about social norms, right? And so we watched all those Seinfeld clips, and we said that, when people, we have a lot of social rules that we have to follow, and many of those rules we don't even really think about, and we don't even really know that we know those rules until we see somebody breaking them, and then we realize it's a rule. And again, that's what the Seinfeld show is so good at. But I think one of the things that works against people with mental illnesses are the fact that often they don't follow social norms and social rules, right? They often violate them. And so they may act differently, they may dress differently, they may behave differently, they may not observe social customs in terms of how they speak with people or when they speak with people. And I think in general, not following social rules and social norms is something that makes human beings uncomfortable and suspicious. And any of us can do this. Any of us can create discomfort in others around us by not following social rules. And I think, I'm gonna sneeze here. Sorry. Okay, bless me. For people with mental illnesses, sometimes they don't follow social norms and social rules. And so I think that has a tendency to make people more uncomfortable. And I think, again, that contributes to the different experience that people with mental illness have in society versus people with a physical illness or a physical disability. So I think there's an important difference there that maybe that's something we could think about. Okay, so we were watching this documentary here, and there were a few questions I asked you, right? And so the first question, there we go. The first question I asked you was, what social groups does Adam Pearson belong to? And so we said that he was a man, right? So his gender is, he's a man. We're guessing he's heterosexual. It's probably not a bad guess, but I don't know that there's anything really in this documentary that proves that. He probably comes from a Christian background, although it's unclear about how religious he is. He's a British citizen. He's a UK citizen. He's an English speaker. We didn't say that. He seems to be from sort of a middle socioeconomic class. And of course, he's white. He's white. And he has a disability, right? He has a facial disfigurement, and he has some disability. He's blind in one eye, I think he said. So it's interesting to think about Adam and this sort of intersectionality around him, because many of the social groups he belongs to are actually dominant groups, right? White, male, English-speaking British citizens in the middle class are a reasonably powerful group in UK society. But he has a disfigurement, right? He has a disability. And again, this is a disability that is not easily covered, right? He doesn't blend into the crowd, right? His face is very noticeable. It's very distinctive. And so again, that's going to change his experience in society, because of course that's what you don't have to answer these if you don't want to, because we talked about them already. But I did ask you this on Friday, right? How has he experienced discrimination? And we saw people kind of invading his space a little bit, people being a little bit rude to him and his friend at the nightclub. We saw people not sitting by him on the bus, even though there was, lots of seats around him. Everyone avoided him. We heard about instances where people stared at him. And again, Adam and his mother acknowledge that people are going to look at him twice because he does look so different. But having a second look because you're not sure what you saw is okay, but then, people stare and sometimes they make rude comments and hurtful comments. And so Adam's experienced a lot of this in his life, sadly, right? The other thing he said that maybe I'll explain to you is that when they were in the bar, I think Adam said something about being a piece of public property, right? That people with disabilities are treated as public property. And what he meant by that is that people don't obey proper social rules when dealing with someone like this. So again, the sort of drunken woman who came up to the young man in the wheelchair and said, "Oh, do a wheelie," right? You don't just walk up to people in society and tell them to do things, right? Hey, stand on your head. You don't do that. That's not correct social behavior, right? Another guy, I think when they were walking into that club, said to Adam, I know you, I see you all the time. And again, that's not kind of correct social behavior, right? You don't just point your finger at someone and say, I know you. It's just not polite. But again, Adam says that with people with disabilities, and with him in particular, people don't follow normal social rules. They don't treat him, and this is probably an important statement, they don't treat him like a real person, right? They treat him as less than a person. And they might even be doing that unconsciously, not on purpose. But of course, as we know, you don't have to try to hurt someone on purpose in order to hurt them, right? So Adam's been subjected to a lot of this, unfortunately, because he has a very distinctive face, right? I asked you this on Friday too. I asked you this on Friday too. I said, in what ways does Adam and other people deal with prejudicial statements? And we said that usually they kind of laugh them off, right? They try to ignore them because, again, they're quite hurtful. They're quite uncomfortable. People with disabilities can't normally, I think, rely on the support of people around them. And so if they make a big deal out of things, if they try to call out this type of inappropriate behavior, again, people probably won't support them. And so if you remember the young man in the bar with where he's got the hair over his eye, he was punched in the face for no other reason than no other reason than his face. But did he make a big deal out of it? No, because he didn't feel safe. There were a lot of other guys with this person who punched him, and he didn't go to the police either because he thought that the police wouldn't help him. And then when we saw Adam go to the police, we see that maybe that's not a surprising assumption because the police don't seem interested in helping Adam either. We said that, whoops, oh, it's too long. We said that disability hate crimes receive more lenient sentences than other types of hate crimes. And so Adam makes that point that if you punch him because he's disabled, you can get up to 6 months in prison. But if you were to punch someone because they were Catholic or Muslim or gay, you might actually wind up in jail for 2 years. And that's a pretty big difference, right? And so the question was, why are there more lenient sentences? And I think what we came up with, I think what somebody said, and I can't remember who, was that it kind of showed that it's not as important, right? They're not as valued. It's not as bad if you punch a disabled person. It's much worse to punch someone from a religious minority or a racial minority. And quite frankly, I don't agree with that. Obviously, people need equal protection, and maybe even more so, right? If you're dealing with someone with a physical or a mental disability, I would argue that in some cases they are more vulnerable than your average person. And so to just punch them in the face is actually worse, I would say, than to punch someone who, can defend themselves. But that's just my thing. Okay, so here's the new stuff. So we didn't talk about this question on Friday, and it did get answered in the extra 10 minutes that we watched. So what did you say for this one here? So what was the issue with how disability hate crimes were prosecuted? And so if you remember in the video, Adam went to see a former or existing Crown prosecutor, so a lawyer for the government. He went up to his office and sat down with him, and they talked about what was the issue around disability hate crimes. Do you remember what they said? They came up with 3 things. They came up with 3 things. Because I think Adam showed us some statistics, right? And he said in his statistics, he showed us that there are far fewer disability hate crimes that are convicted than seem to have happened, right? So the estimates that there's a pretty large number of disability hate crimes happening, but only a very few people actually go to trial. And so the question was, why? Why was that? Okay, so Karen says, there are many hate crimes against people with disabilities that aren't reported. They're viewed as less important. Yeah, so that's definitely a factor, right? And I think we saw two pieces of evidence about that, right? So Adam himself feels like he has some hate speech happening on his YouTube page, and he goes to the police and they say, oh, there's nothing we can do, take care of it yourself, right? So Adam kind of tries to report something and the police aren't really that interested. We see that his friend, again, the guy with the hair over his eye in the bar, a crime actually happens to him, right? He gets punched in the face for no reason at all, but he doesn't report it, right? Because he feels that the police won't take him seriously, or, that he won't really get any support. So people in society seem to view these crimes as less important. And again, because of that, people will report them less, right? So again, if you know that the police aren't going to help you or protect you, you're not going to go to them, right? And so again, you're not even going to report what happens to you because you get the message that you're not important, right? So Casey says it's only considered a basic offense, and so. And there are, I think, I asked you about social institutions. So hospitals are involved in this, yeah. Police are definitely involved in this. Government is involved in this, right? Because government makes the laws. You could say the criminal justice system is involved in this as well, because they're the ones who prosecute these crimes, right? They're the ones who bring them before a judge, and the judge rules, guilty or not guilty, and hands out punishments. So the sort of criminal justice system, the police, the government, all of them are involved in these things. Healthcare is involved. That's good. Considered a basic offense. The police may assume that it's their fault. That's true. Baha says the judge will give a lesser sentence for a disability crime. Yes, that's the third point. So of these 3 points, Baha, that's the third point. So there's 2 points that come before, and then the kind of end result of those two is that judges give more lenient sentences. They hand out lower penalties. And so what's the two that come before that? There's kind of 2 steps in this process. But that's the third one. Okay, so okay, good. So the police are not charging people. The police are not reporting. The police are not reporting these things as hate crimes, right? Why not? Why aren't they? There's more to this picture. There's a bit of a cause and effect thing happening here. These people don't do this, so these people don't do this, so these people don't do something else. Okay? So there's a few steps to this process. But you've got a few pieces of the puzzle here, Baha. You've definitely got the last piece, that the judges hand out lesser sentences, and people aren't viewing these as hate crimes. But actually, no, I think this is the second one, Baha. This is the second one. But it's not the police, it's actually Crown prosecutors. So, I don't know how familiar you are with the legal system, but usually you have a judge, right, who's going to judge the case, right? And then you've got two lawyers. You've got the lawyer for the defendant, the defense lawyer, the person who's being accused of something, and then you've got the Crown prosecutor. And the Crown prosecutor is usually working when the Crown prosecutor is working for the government, and the Crown prosecutor is saying, yes, this person did it, and the defense lawyer is saying, no, my client didn't do it, right? So the Crown prosecutor is the one who charges people. And so what's happening here in both of these is if the Crown prosecutor, there it is, you got it, buddy. If the Crown prosecutor doesn't charge this person with a hate crime, then it doesn't get tried as a hate crime, right? It gets tried as something else. So if you imagine, again, our friend in the documentary with the hair over his eye, again, I should really write down people's names, but I know he has a name. When he got punched in the face in that bar, if he went to the police and the police said this is a hate crime and wrote it up as a hate crime, then the person who punched him would be charged with a hate crime, right? The prosecutor would put it before the judge and say this person is charged with a hate crime because he punched this guy in the face because he has a disfigurement, right? But if the Crown prosecutor doesn't charge him that way, if the Crown prosecutor just says, oh, it's an assault, that's all it is, right? Then it gets tried as an assault, right? The judge can only rule on what comes before him, right? He can only rule on the case that is given to him. And so if the Crown prosecutor says this is an assault, the judge can only say guilty or not guilty. So it's up to the Crown prosecutor to say this is not an assault, this is a hate crime, right? And we need to try it this way. Then the judge, like you've mentioned here, Baha, then the judge can actually rule on it as a hate crime and he can give them a stronger sentence. But again, we've said that the sentences are different, right? And so even if the hate crime is convicted, that person is going to get a smaller punishment because it's just a disabled person. And Baha, you've got the first part of it there too. So they say that police are actually embarrassed by people's disability and they don't want to talk about it. And again, I can't speak for all of your cultures out there, but in Western culture, usually what we're taught to do with people's disabilities is we're taught not to point them out, right? Like, don't stare, don't point them out, don't ask questions, just pretend that the disability is not there, right? And so, again, I'm not letting police off the hook here, but I am saying that there's a cultural thing that we're taught that we're not supposed to ask about people's disabilities, right? We're not supposed to say, hey, how did you wind up in that wheelchair? We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to ignore the fact that the person is in a chair and simply talk to them normally, right? That's what we're supposed to do. And so the police probably, I would suggest, might need a little more training in this regard. But police are probably just following cultural rules and not asking about these kinds of things. And so as a result, when the police write up their report, they don't call it a hate crime. They don't draw attention to the disability. They just say, this person got punched in the face, right? And so the police pass it on to the Crown prosecutor. The Crown prosecutor looks, okay, this guy got punched in the face. That's an assault. We'll charge it as an assault. It goes before the judge. The judge says, okay, it's an assault, guilty or not guilty. And then the person actually doesn't get punished appropriately because really he committed a hate crime, but he got charged with a simple assault, right? And so, again, there's some education and training that needs to happen here because people aren't paying attention to hate crimes against people with disabilities, whereas hate crimes against race or sexual orientation or religion, people are much more aware of those kinds of things, and so they tend to get reported properly and they tend to get tried properly. But here with disabilities, there's some education missing, and we even see that when, I don't know if we've seen it in the video yet or not. I hope I won't spoil it for you, but Adam goes around in the streets and he says, hey, do you know what disableism is? And lots of people don't know, right? A couple of people do, but a lot of people don't even know what disableism is. But when you ask them about racism, everybody knows what racism is. So there's an educational piece that's missing here, right? People need to be educated about this stuff. Hayden is probably more likely. It's probably like this. Yeah, I don't think anyone is named Maiden. I don't think, as far as I know, at least not any guys, Baha. But Hayden is probably more likely. So okay, maybe that's his name. Good work. Okay, so here's what we'll do. There is, let me just check the video here. 45, 55, 56, 57. There's 22, okay. There's 22 minutes left in the documentary. And so what I'd like you to do is watch that last 22 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then come back here and we'll talk about the last few answers, okay? So 45, so I need 35 minutes, so that's 9:20, I think. I think that's 9:20. So go watch the, oh, that's okay. Well, at least you got it close enough, right? You got it close enough, Baha, so that's good. Yeah, I feel bad when, you know, we meet these people in a documentary and I forget their name, and then I just have to keep referring to them by some sort of physical characteristics. So yeah, hopefully his name's Hayden. If it is, Hayden's the guy we're talking about. Yeah, so go watch the rest of the video. Again, the link and the questions are still in Microsoft Teams. You'll just have to scroll up to Friday. Watch the rest of it, take a 10-minute break. We'll come back here at around 9:20 and we'll talk about the last few questions, okay? So I'll set you loose to do that, and I'll see you after the rest of the documentary, and then we'll talk about what we've seen, okay? So enjoy. Okay, people, and we're back. So, now that we've watched the end of our friend Adam's little documentary, let's finish up our questions here. So, when we started back in, what kind of stereotypical or prejudicial ideas have shaped Adam's childhood and adult life? This is where he goes to the movies, it's that part. And how are these connected to the socialization process? Yeah, good question. Okay, so Karen says people with disabilities are villains, and that's why people mistreat him. Yes, well, definitely. I'm sure this is what you mean, but I'll qualify it. Yeah, people with disabilities in movies, not in real life, but in movies, are often villains, right? And I'm sure all of us can think of movies in which we have seen this be the case, right? James Bond movies are very good for this. Lots of times the villains have some sort of disfigurement or scarring or something of their face, and of course James Bond is beautiful and handsome, right? So there's that. People like I think the documentary here brings up Voldemort, who is not a very attractive fellow, right? Darth Vader from the Star Wars. If you take the helmet off, he's all scarred under there. Who else? I'm kind of drawing a blank, but I think we wouldn't have to look too far to see movie villains who are disfigured or scarred or kind of ugly in some way, right? And again, that's connected to what we talked about last unit in sexism, right? We said that often people in advertisements or people in movies or TV shows, they use stereotypes in order to save time, right? In order to tell something to the audience immediately so they can save time in the story, right? And so again, when you're watching a movie and you see a guy kind of dressed in black and he's all hunched over and he's his face is disformed or disfigured, that's the bad guy, right? You immediately know you're not looking at the hero of the story, unless it happens to be sort of a Hunchback of Notre Dame kind of story. But for the most part, that that's the bad guy, right? And so filmmakers and other media artists can very easily communicate that this guy is bad because we have this stereotype of disfigurement or deformity being scary or bad or evil, right? And so, but of course that's going to affect Adam, right? Because if the stereotype in society is that people with facial disfigurements are weird or scary or bad or villainous, that's going to affect the way that people treat him, right? And so, but again, I think we could all very easily think of movie or television or comic villains who have some form of scarring or disfigurement, right? And even if you look very recently at the Marvel movies, even if you look at Thanos, even though Thanos has kind of a purple head and it's hard to sort of see, Thanos has a bunch of scars on his face as well. So even though he's not a human, he's some other form of life, even he is scarred or disfigured in some way, right? So these kinds of ideas show up a lot in movies, and again, they affect how people with facial disfigurements are treated in real life, unfortunately. Okay, so the next part is where Adam meets with that psychologist. They do a little bit of a test, and what do they discover as a result of that test? And so, if you'll remember, there's a bunch of people at computers, and they're taking a test on the computer that is designed to reveal prejudice against disfigurement. And I think the way they do this, don't quote me on this, but I think the way they do this is they show you pictures of people's faces, okay? And what they do, sorry guys, just give me one moment, okay? Sorry, people. The building is going to wash our balconies today, and they wanted to come in, so I told them to give me some time here. Yeah, nice try, my friend. Okay, so the last question I asked, the psychological test. So they put up pictures of people's faces on the screen, I think, and they kind of Photoshop them to look a little different, right? So they might make the faces a little less symmetrical, or they might make one eye bigger than the other. They kind of change them a little bit, and I think they ask them questions like, who would you trust more? Or who would you expect to help you carry your groceries into your house? Or they kind of ask questions like this. And so these are designed to expose people's subconscious prejudices, ideas people have about people based on the way they look. And so they did a bunch of tests, and lots of people had subconscious prejudices against people with facial disfigurements, right? And some people had up to 100%, which I'm sure was a little bit shocking and embarrassing for that person. But that's probably not surprising, right? Because we see that it's probably not surprising because we see that there are messages like that being circulated in society, right? We go to the movies and we see people with disfigurements as evil villains, right? And so, of course, people are going to absorb messages that say, don't trust people with disfigurements because they might be bad or evil. And so even though we might not think about those things consciously, people are acting on them. And that test is meant to show the subconscious, where is it? There. The subconscious nature of what people think, right? So people have prejudice, right? They have stereotypes. They discriminate against people with facial disfigurements, but they don't realize it, right? But there's a little more to this, right? There's more to this picture, because they do the test, and then unexpectedly, the people get to go into another room. They go downstairs, and they actually meet someone with a facial disfigurement, right? They meet Adam, and so they hang out with him for a little while. They play Jenga, of course. They do a little, conversation, question and answer. They ask Adam about his facial disfigurement, and he explains what the medical condition he has and sort of what's going on. And then they go back upstairs and they take the test again, right? And so, what's the result there of them going back upstairs and taking that test a second time? Yeah, so Baha says their degree of prejudice or discrimination actually lowered, right? So again, I can't speak to how accurate this test is because I don't understand how it works and I'm not a psychologist, but the idea is to figure out how prejudiced people are before, have them interact with someone with a facial disfigurement, and then measure them after. And so most people see that their scores drop pretty significantly, right? And so their prejudices are reduced upon actually interacting with a real person, right? So prior to that, yeah, exactly. Prior to those tests, prior to interacting with Adam, all they had was their stereotypical ideas, their prejudices, right? That's all they had to sort of judge people. But in speaking with Adam, again, those prejudices are lessened, right? And maybe I'll ask you this question and you can respond to me here, but did you notice, I certainly noticed, but did you notice that when you first started watching this documentary on Friday and Adam comes on the screen, you kind of have this reaction like, whoa, that's quite a face, right? You're kind of a little surprised by it. But then by the end of the documentary, did you find that you were just kind of looking at him and you're like, yeah, that's Adam, right? You kind of got used to his face and it just kind of became less noticeable, right? And you sort of start paying attention to more of him as a person rather than the face, right? Because again, the face is what you notice very early on. But did you find that? Did you find you kind of paid less attention to his face as the documentary went on and you kind of started to see him as just a average kind of guy? So Erica says yeah. Okay. You called it? You expected to see that. Okay. I guess that's fair. The title kind of gave it away. But still, did you find yourself paying less attention to his face as it went on? Yeah, because I certainly did. I started seeing him more as just kind of like a regular guy. You know, he's not he's not weird, he's not strange or bizarre, he doesn't have a strange personality. He kind of is, a regular person, but again, his face is quite distinctive, right? Yeah, you just kind of notice it less, right? And so again, at first it's like, whoa, that's quite a face. Yeah, but after a while it's like, okay, he is what he is, right? That's how he looks, fine. And the more you hear him speak and follow him around, the more you kind of get to know his personality, right? You get to know who he is as a person. And so I think that happened for the people in the psychological test as well. They started to see Adam less as a stereotype and more as Adam, right? That's what Adam looks like. This is what Adam's personality is, and his face you kind of just get used to, and you don't think about it so much anymore, right? So maybe I'll jump ahead one question. I asked you, what does he decide to do? Well, he decides to take a comedy class, right? So he takes a comedy improv class, right? And so he's telling jokes with people and trying to be funny, and it looks like he is funny. It looks like he's successful. And then he goes to what's called an open mic night. And so sometimes pubs and bars will have a little stage, and they'll have a microphone there, and you can simply sign up and go up on stage and do your thing, right? And so it might be, maybe you're a singer and you get up there with your guitar and play. Maybe you tell jokes. Maybe you are a poet and you can read your poetry. You can do all kinds of things up there, and there's, you can just volunteer to go up and do your thing. And so that's what Adam does. He goes to one of these open microphone nights, and he signs up and stands up there and tells some jokes, and people seem to think he's funny. And he is kind of funny. I think his jokes were okay. So how is this helpful in terms of social justice and in terms of equality in society? How is it helpful what Adam is doing here? How is it helpful? So Baha says it's helpful because it introduces him to the public and make him more acceptable. Yeah. So in that little psychological test, we saw that people's prejudice against people with disfigurements, facial disfigurements, their prejudice was reduced when they interacted with someone who had a facial disfigurement, right? When they actually met a real person and interacted with a real person. So when Adam gets up on stage, he does the same thing, but he gets to interact with, a few dozen people or however many people are in the bar or the pub, right? They interact with him, and again, they probably notice the face very quickly, but then after they start to just see him as him. And it's helpful because people become familiar with these kinds of disabilities, and they get to meet someone with a disfigurement and they get to know them. And I think the documentary is successful that way too, because we've actually been able to meet him as well, right? We've been able to hear Adam and hear his thoughts and see him go around town, and we've met his mom, we've been to his house, we met his brother. So we kind of got to know Adam in the process of this too. And I don't know if our level of prejudice dropped, but certainly, I think at the beginning of the documentary, we probably saw him more as, the face, right? And then toward the end of the documentary, we kind of just saw him as Adam, right? That's who Adam is, and we kind of don't pay as much attention to his disfigurement, right? So yeah, the comedy thing, but also the documentary, helps to reduce prejudice for all people with facial disfigurements, right? Because again, we all get to meet Adam, we all get to interact with him, and we get to see that, he's just a normal guy, right? He has a very distinctive face, but yeah, he's just a person like all of us, right? Yeah, okay. I think I might leave it there. So very quickly, a little bit of housekeeping here. You have your final paper to do, and it's going to be due on Friday of next week, so August the 7th, I think it is. So continue to work on that. I have, I think, all of your micropaper 2. I have all of them marked, so I'm going to send the grading out a little bit later today. Yeah, that's all the housekeeping I think I have. So I'll end it here. We'll review a little bit about Adam's case tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about structural privilege. I have another short video to show you, maybe 5 minutes or so, which is also very interesting from another person with a different kind of disability. I'll show you that tomorrow, and then we'll kind of move on, and I think we'll move on to religious oppression after that. And I don't have a lot of material on that, but we'll explore it and see what we can learn. Yeah, so that said, I think I'll leave it there for today. As usual, if you have any questions, you can always message me and I'll try to help you out. Thank you for participating in the live chat today. Did a good job. Yeah, and that's all I have for today. So I'll end it here, and I'll see you all first thing tomorrow. Hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see some of you in comparative cultures in 20 minutes. Okay, so bye.